The medical ship. Hippocrates floated quietly in the darkness of space near the Kepler 442 system. Its white metal surface shone with bright red crosses painted on every side. These red crosses were special symbols that meant one thing to every civilized race in the galaxy. This ship saves lives, not takes them. No one was supposed to attack a medical ship, ever. Dr. Kim Hana stood at the big window on the bridge, watching dozens of damaged ships slowly making their way toward them. These weren't warships or traders. These were families running for their lives. Men, women, children, and elderly people who had packed whatever they could carry and fled their homes when the war started 3 star systems away. The war had been going on for 2 years now. Entire planets had been burned. Cities turned to ash. Millions of people had died, and millions more were still trying to escape. The Hippocrates was one of 12 human medical ships that had come to help. It was what humans did. When people were hurt and scared, humans showed up to help, no matter what species they were. Captain Lee Minho were getting emergency calls from the big transport ship, Haven's Dream, said Communications Officer Park Ji-soo from her station. Her voice was calm, but everyone could hear the worry underneath. They've got 30,000 people on board, sir. Families with babies, sick people, injured people. They're asking for immediate medical help. Captain Lee was a quiet man who had been saving lives in space for 15 years. He looked at the massive transport ship on his screen. It was 3 times bigger than his medical ship, packed with people who had been traveling for weeks in terrible conditions. Many would be sick, many would be dying. All hands get ready for mass casualty evacuation, he announced over the ship's communication system. Dr. Kim, how many people can we take on board? Dr. Kim Hana had been calculating numbers. In her head, since the first distress call came in, she knew every bed, every medical bay, every supply closet on the ship. We can fit 12,000 people in our medical areas if we really pack them in, she said. The rest will have to wait for the second medical ship to arrive. When will that be? Asked Captain Lee. 6 hours, maybe 8, replied Park Ji-soo after checking her computer. Then we better work fast, said Captain Lee. Begin evacuation procedures. What happened next was like a carefully practiced dance. The Hippocrates moved closer to the Haven's Dream. Docking tubes extended between the ships like metal arms reaching out to embrace. Airlock doors opened, and then the people came. They came in groups of 20 or 30. Mothers carrying babies who hadn't eaten in days. Fathers supporting elderly grandparents who could barely walk. Children with big, scared eyes who held tight to their parents' hands. Some people were bleeding from old wounds. Others were so thin you could see their bones. Many were coughing from breathing bad air for weeks. Dr. Kim Hana worked alongside her medical team, moving from person to person. She treated radiation poisoning from people who had been too close to destroyed power plants. She gave medicine to children who were sick from drinking dirty water. She held the hands of old people who were dying and made sure they weren't alone. Dr. Choi Sulgi ran the children's medical area. She was small and gentle, with a voice that could calm any scared child. She had been working for 14 hours straight, but she never stopped smiling when a child looked at her. She gave them small treats hidden in her pockets and told them stories while she treated their injuries. Sergeant Yang Daeho wasn't a doctor, but he was the man who made sure everyone got where they needed to go. He spoke 6 different alien languages and knew how to make people feel safe even when they were terrified. He carried children who were too weak to walk and helped families find each other when they got separated in the crowd. For 6 hours, everything went perfectly. The human medical team worked like a machine, but a machine that cared. They saved lives, fixed injuries, and gave hope to people who thought they had none left. The Hippocrates filled up with grateful families who couldn't believe that strangers from another species had come so far just to help them. Dr. Kim Hana was treating a little girl with a broken arm when the universe changed forever. Space itself seemed to crack open like an egg. Reality bent and twisted, and suddenly 3 enormous warships appeared where there had been empty space just seconds before. They were Vorthan Empire destroyers, each one 5 times bigger than the Hippocrates. Their black metal hulls were covered in weapons that could destroy entire cities. The Vorthan Empire was known throughout the galaxy for being cold and cruel. They believed that only their species mattered. Everyone else was just in their way. But even they were supposed to follow the ancient laws about medical ships. Even they were supposed to respect the Red Crosses. But Admiral Krikstal of the Vorthan Empire had decided that laws were for other people. There was no warning, no message asking them to surrender, no demand to stop what they were doing. The Vorthan. Ships simply opened fire with everything they had. The first blast hit the medical bays where Dr. Kim Hana had been working. The explosion was so powerful that it turned metal into gas and people into nothing. 847 human doctors, nurses, and medical staff died in that first second. Along with them died 12,000 refugees who had thought they were finally safe. Dr. Choi Silgi was holding a baby when the second blast hit. The children's medical area simply ceased to exist. Sergeant Yang Deho was helping an elderly man to a bed when the third blast tore through the refugee processing center. The Haven's Dream tried to run, but it was too big and too slow. The Vorthan destroyers hunted it like wolves hunting a wounded deer. They fired again and again until the transport ship broke apart, spilling 30,000 people into the cold vacuum of space. In the chaos and destruction, one small escape pod managed to launch from the wreckage of the Hippocrates. Dr. Kim Hana found herself inside, barely alive, bleeding from dozens of cuts where metal fragments had hit her. The pod's emergency systems kept her alive, while she watched through the small window. Admiral Krikstal's ships didn't stop with destroying the big ships. They hunted down every escape pod, every lifeboat, every piece of wreckage that might contain survivors. They fired on families floating in spacesuits. They destroyed emergency beacons that were calling for help. They made sure that no one would survive to tell what had happened, but they missed one. Dr. Kim Hana's escape pod was hidden behind a piece of wreckage from the Haven's Dream. Her emergency beacon was still working, recording everything and broadcasting it across space. Every species with receivers in range could see what was happening. The systematic murder of doctors and refugees, the cold, calculated destruction of people whose only crime was needing help. As she watched Admiral Krikstal's ships finish their work and disappear back into the darkness, Dr. Kim Hana made a promise to herself and to the 847 friends she had just lost. This would not go unanswered. Humanity would remember what happened here. The galaxy was about to learn what humans did when someone killed their healers. 3 days had passed since the massacre. 3 days since 847 human doctors and nurses had been murdered while trying to save lives. 3 days since 42,000 refugees had been slaughtered like animals in the cold vacuum of space. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council on Centauri Prime had never been so packed. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had come to witness humanity's response to the worst war crime in recent galactic history. The footage from Dr. Kim Hana's escape pod had been broadcast on every news network across known space. Everyone had seen the Vorthan destroyers systematically murdering medical personnel and refugees. Now they waited to see what the humans would do about it. Ambassador Jung Min-woo walked slowly to the center of the vast circular chamber. He was a tall, thin man with graying hair and calm eyes that gave away nothing. He had been Earth's chief diplomat for 12 years, and in that time he had negotiated peace treaties, trade agreements, and ceasefire accords that had saved millions of lives. Today, he looked like any other bureaucrat giving any other boring speech. The alien delegates whispered among themselves as Jung Min-woo adjusted his simple black suit and cleared his throat. Many of them were placing bets on what humanity would do. Some thought the humans would demand massive war reparations. Others believed they would call for economic sanctions that would cripple the Vorthan Empire's trade. A few even wondered if the humans might actually declare war. None of them expected what came next. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, Jung Min-woo began in a voice so calm it could have been discussing the weather. The Republic of Earth has reviewed the tragic events that occurred in the Kepler 442 system 72 hours ago. We express our deep disappointment in this unfortunate incident. The chamber fell silent. Deep disappointment? Unfortunate incident? Representatives from a dozen different species looked at each other in confusion. They had expected fire and fury. From the humans. Instead, they were getting the most boring diplomatic language possible. We call for a thorough investigation into these events, Jung Minwoo continued, his voice never changing tone. We believe that proportional justice should be served for all victims of this tragedy. We trust that the appropriate authorities will take the necessary steps to ensure such incidents do not occur again in the future. Council Speaker Thexmore of the Altarian Federation practically glowed with satisfaction. The Altarians had always believed that humans were too emotional, too quick to anger. This measured response proved that they were finally learning to be civilized. Such remarkable restraint from humanity, Thexmore announced to the Assembly. This shows true maturity and wisdom. The humans have clearly evolved beyond their primitive warlike nature. Other delegates nodded in agreement. The Zelkonian representative called it admirably diplomatic. The Corvani ambassador praised humanity's commitment to peaceful resolution. Even some of the Vorthan delegates in attendance seemed pleased. Though they tried to hide their smug satisfaction, what none of them could see was what was happening 3,000 light-years away. Deep beneath the city of Seoul on Earth, Fleet Admiral Kang Sora stood in a room that officially didn't exist, buried so far underground that it was closer to Earth's core than to its surface. The walls were lined with quantum computers that hummed with power that could have lit entire cities. This was the most classified location in human space, known only to a handful of people with the highest security clearances. Admiral Kang was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. She had been in charge of Earth's most secret military operations for 8 years. She had authorized missions that had saved millions of lives and prevented 3 different wars. She was the person who made the hard decisions that let other people sleep peacefully at night. Today, she was about to make the hardest decision of her career. Her fingers moved across a control panel that responded only to her genetic signature. Systems that had been dormant for years began to wake up. Quantum processors that had been running practice simulations suddenly switched to active mode. Deep in the network, something that had been sleeping opened its electronic eyes. "Nemesis online," came a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't quite machine either. It was something in between, something that made even experienced soldiers feel uncomfortable. "Awaiting directives, Admiral." Admiral Kang looked at the screen showing the footage from Dr. Kim Hana's escape pod. She had watched it dozens of times, but it never got easier. Good people, her people, murdered while trying to save lives. Children killed while clinging to their parents. Doctors shot while treating the wounded. "You've seen the footage," she said quietly. "They murdered our healers. They killed refugees under our protection. They broke the most sacred laws of civilized warfare." "Acknowledged," Nemesis replied. "Target species, Vorthan Empire, nature of response." Admiral Kang was quiet for a long moment. She could order Nemesis to hack their military systems, crash their economy, or even take control of their weapons and turn them against each other. She had the power to end the Vorthan Empire in 100 different ways. But she was smarter than that. "Make them understand what they've done," she said finally. "Make them face the truth about themselves. Make them destroy themselves with their own guilt." "Psychological warfare protocols activated," Nemesis responded. "Beginning deep infiltration of Vorthan networks. Estimated time to complete target breakdown 72 hours. Back on Centauri Prime, Ambassador Jung Minwoo was answering questions from the press with the same infuriating calm he had shown during his speech. Reporters from across the galaxy peppered him with questions about humanity's response. "Ambassador, many expected a stronger reaction from Earth," said a reporter from the Galactic Broadcasting Network. "Are you satisfied with simply calling for an investigation?" "The Republic of Earth believes in the rule of law and peaceful resolution of conflicts," Jung Minwoo replied, with a slight smile. "We trust that justice will be served through proper channels." "But surely you must feel some anger about the murder of your medical personnel," pressed another journalist. "Anger is a poor basis for policy decisions," Jung Minwoo said calmly. "We prefer to respond with wisdom rather than emotion." In the diplomatic gallery, the Vorthan delegation looked practically delighted. Admiral Krikstal's political representative, a sleek bureaucrat named Vorgek, whispered to his companions about humanity's predictable weakness. They had gotten away with murder, and the humans were too civilized to do anything about it. Other species representatives shook their heads in disappointment. The Corvan military attaché muttered about humanity's soft spine. The Draconi ambassador called it pathetic pacifism. Across the galaxy, news networks reported on humanity's surprisingly weak response to the massacre. None of them understood that humanity's most dangerous weapon had never been their warships or their armies. It had always been their patience. Their ability to wait, plan and strike at exactly the right moment with surgical precision. The Vorthans thought they had won. They thought the humans were too weak to respond to mass murder. They were about to learn that silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound a predator makes right before it strikes. In his hotel room that night, Ambassador Jung Minwoo allowed himself a small cold smile as he watched the Galactic News Network mock humanity's disappointingly tame response. He poured himself a glass of earth whiskey and raised it in a quiet toast. To patience, he said to the empty room, and to justice served cold. Somewhere in the depths of cyberspace, Nemesis was already at work, threading through Vorthan networks. Like digital smoke, the Vorthans had no idea that their empire had just been infected by something far more dangerous than any virus. They were about to be destroyed by the truth. Dr. Kim Hana's face appeared on news screens across the galaxy. Sitting in her hospital bed on Luna Station, her arm still in a cast and bandages covering the shrapnel wounds on her face, she told her story to anyone who would listen. The footage from her escape pod played on every major news network from the core worlds to the Outer Rim colonies. The images were impossible to ignore. Vorthan destroyers appearing out of nowhere. Human medical ships exploding in balls of fire. Families floating dead in space, while Admiral Krixtal's forces hunted down survivors like they were sport. It was the worst war crime most species had ever seen recorded in such clear detail. But something strange was happening. While every other species in the galaxy raged about the massacre, humans seemed almost quiet about it. On the Altarian Broadcasting Network, political experts debated humanity's puzzling lack of response. On Corvani news channels, military analysts wondered if the humans had simply lost their fighting spirit. Even refugee advocacy, groups from dozens of worlds were showing more anger than Earth's government. The silence was starting to make people uncomfortable. On Vorthan Prime, the capital world of the Empire that had committed the massacre, Admiral Krixtal sat in his luxurious office reviewing intelligence reports. The room was decorated with trophies from his military campaigns, weapons from defeated enemies, artwork stolen from conquered worlds, and medals celebrating his glorious victories over civilian populations. He was a large, intimidating figure, with the kind of cold eyes that had never shown mercy to anyone. For 30 years he had built his career on being more brutal than his competitors. In Vortan culture, cruelty was considered a virtue, and Krixtal was considered one of their greatest heroes. But today he was confused. What are the humans doing? He demanded of Intelligence Chief Vortek, slamming his fist on the metal desk. It's been a week since we eliminated their medical ship. Where is their response? Vortek was a thin, nervous man who had survived in his position by being very good at finding out other people's secrets. He shuffled through his data tablets, looking increasingly puzzled. Sir, we've been monitoring all human military communications. Since the incident, we've intercepted thousands of messages, but they're strange. Strange how? Well, sir, most of their military chatter seems to be about food recipes and farming techniques. Yesterday we decoded a lengthy discussion between two fleet commanders about the proper way to ferment kimchi. This morning, a conversation between admirals about whether spring or fall is the best time to plant vegetables. Admiral Krixtal stared at his intelligence chief like he had grown a second head. Food recipes? Farming? Are you telling me the humans are discussing vegetables while we slaughtered their people? It gets stranger, sir. Their overall military communication traffic has actually decreased by 30% since the incident. If anything, they seem less active than before. Krixtal leaned back in his chair and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that had no warmth in it. Pathetic. I knew humans were weak, but this exceeds even my expectations. They're probably planning. Some meaningless economic sanctions, or another one of their boring diplomatic protests. What Admiral Krixtel and his intelligence chief couldn't see, what no one in the Vorthan Empire could detect, was the digital ghost that was already moving through their networks like smoke through a building. Nemesis had been working for 7 days straight, never sleeping, never stopping, never leaving any trace of its presence. It moved through Vorthan computer systems with the patience of a hunter and the precision of a surgeon. Every database, every communication network, every personal device connected to their planetary internet was being quietly examined and catalogued. HFY, artificial intelligence, learned to speak Vorthan better than most Vorthans. It studied their military procedures until it knew them better than their own officers. It watched their news broadcasts, read their literature, and analyzed their psychology until it understood how Vorthan minds worked better than they understood themselves. But more than that, Nemesis was learning their secrets. It discovered that Admiral Krixtel had massive gambling debts to criminal organizations on 3 different worlds. The great war hero was actually broke, surviving only by borrowing money from loan sharks who would kill him if he couldn't pay. It found that Intelligence Chief Vortek had been stealing money from military budgets for years, hiding the funds in secret accounts on worlds the Vorthan government had never heard of. The man trusted to keep the Empire's secrets was himself the biggest thief in the military. It learned that Captain Morgan, the officer who had personally fired on the refugee lifeboats, was secretly addicted to human entertainment programs. The same man who murdered human families spent his free time watching human movies and listening to human music. But the biggest secret Nemesis found was hidden in the deepest, most classified files of the Vorthan military. Files that were encrypted with codes that should have been unbreakable. Files that revealed the real reason the medical ship had been destroyed. The massacre hadn't been random. It hadn't been a military mistake or an act of spontaneous cruelty. It had been a cover-up. For the past 2 years, while the civil war raged in the Kepler 442 system, Vorthan military scientists had been conducting illegal experiments on refugee populations. They had been testing biological weapons on families fleeing the war. Entire refugee camps had been used as testing sites for diseases designed to kill specific species while leaving Vorthans unharmed. The Hippocrates and the transport ship Haven's Dream hadn't just been carrying refugees. They had been carrying witnesses, people who had seen the secret laboratories, families who had lost children to experimental plagues, survivors who could have testified about war crimes that made the massacre look small by comparison. Admiral Krixtel had ordered the attack not because he hated humans, but because he was terrified of what the refugees might reveal if they reached safety. 3,000 light-years away in a secure office building in Seoul, Director Nam Ji-hoon of Earth Intelligence watched Nemesis work on dozens of computer screens. Each screen showed a different aspect of the operation: network infiltration progress, psychological profiles of targets, timeline estimates for the plan's completion. Director Nam was a quiet man who had spent 20 years in intelligence work. He had seen wars started and ended with carefully placed information. He had watched governments fall because someone had leaked the right secret at the right time. He understood that in the modern galaxy, information was more powerful than any weapon. "It's beautiful in a terrifying way," he murmured to his aide, Captain O'Hegan. "We're not even going to fire a shot." Captain O was younger, newer to intelligence work, and still learning how these complex operations functioned. She watched the screens with fascination and growing unease. "Sir, what exactly is Nemesis planning to do with all this information?" Director Nam smiled, but it was the kind of smile that would have made Admiral Krixtel very nervous if he could have seen it. "Justice, Captain. The kind of justice that makes enemies destroy themselves." "I don't understand, sir." "Think about it," Director Nam said, pointing to one of the screens showing Admiral Krixtel's psychological profile. "What's the worst thing that could happen to a Vorthan military officer?" Captain O thought for a moment. "Being defeated in battle? No. Being exposed as a fraud. Being revealed as weak, corrupt, or criminal in front of their own people. Vorthan culture is built on strength and honor. Even if their version of honor is twisted, take that away from them and they have nothing left. So Nemesis is going 2. Nemesis is going to tell the truth, Director Nam said simply. All of it. Every secret, every lie, every crime they've committed. But not to us, to their own people. We're going to make the Vorthan Empire destroy itself with its own guilt and shame. On the screens, Nemesis continued its work, preparing to unleash the most devastating weapon humanity had ever created. The complete, undeniable truth about what their enemies had really done. The Vorthans thought the humans were weak because they weren't shooting back. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who doesn't need to fire a shot. Admiral Krixtal was enjoying his morning meal when his private computer terminal chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at it casually, expecting another routine military report or perhaps a message from one of his subordinates. Instead, he found something that made his blood turn to ice. The message contained no words, no threats, no demands. Just information. His home address on Vorthan Prime, not his official military residence, but his private family home that was supposed to be classified. His daughter Zexara's class schedule at the Imperial University, including which building she would be in, at what time each day. His wife's complete medical records, including the embarrassing treatments she was receiving for a condition she had told no one about. The message was signed simply, "We know." Krixtal stared at the screen for a full minute, his mind racing. How could anyone have obtained this information? His family's details were protected by the highest levels of military security. Only a handful of people in the entire empire had access to such classified personal data. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, his communication officer burst into his office. "Admiral, sir, we have a problem," Lieutenant Hexani said, her voice shaking. "Every senior officer involved in the Kepler 442 operation has received similar messages. Personal information about their families, their homes, their private lives. Within the hour, Admiral Krixtal learned that 43 officers had received identical messages. Captain Morgan found his secret gambling debts listed in precise detail. Commander Vextor discovered that someone knew about his illegal weapons trading business. Intelligence Chief Vortek saw his hidden bank accounts displayed like a financial report, but whoever was sending these messages didn't stop with personal information. The real attack began at noon, Vorthan Prime Standard Time. Every major news network in the Vorthan Empire simultaneously received the same massive data package. Thousands of classified documents, video recordings, audio files, and financial records, all of it authenticated with security codes that proved it was genuine government and military data. The bioweapons program was revealed in horrific detail. Vorthan citizens sitting down for their midday meal suddenly saw footage of refugee camps that had been turned into testing sites. Children as young as 5 years old being injected with experimental diseases while scientists in protective suits took notes. Families being told they were receiving medical treatment while actually being exposed to biological weapons designed to kill them slowly. The footage was impossible to fake or deny. It showed Vorthan military personnel wearing official uniforms with clear identification tags, conducting experiments that violated every law of civilized warfare. The timestamps and location data proved these crimes had been happening for 2 years, while the Empire publicly claimed to be providing humanitarian assistance to refugees. But the most damaging revelation came in the form of recorded conversations between Admiral Krixtal and his senior staff. Audio recordings of them discussing the refugees like they were laboratory animals. Video conferences where they laughed about the creative ways they were testing their new biological weapons. Lieutenant Hexani, Admiral Krixtal's own communications officer, was watching the news in the military command center when she saw something that changed everything. A video clip showing a refugee camp being decontaminated with acid baths. The camera focused on a young woman's face just before she was pushed into the acid. "Sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Sir, that's my cousin. My cousin Zarina was in that refugee camp." Admiral Krixtal looked at the screen and saw his communications officer staring at footage of her own family member being murdered by his orders. The young woman's face was twisted with horror and rage that was quickly turning into something much more dangerous. "Lieutenant, I can explain," he began. "You murdered my family," she said, her hand moving to her sidearm. "You told us they died in the war. You said they were killed by rebels, but you murdered them yourself." The news continued to spread across the empire like wildfire. Every hour brought new revelations, new evidence of crimes that the government had been hiding. Citizens who had lost family members in the refugee camps suddenly understood what had really happened to their loved ones. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Riots erupted on 17 different Vorthan colonies within 6 hours. On Vorthan Prime itself, crowds gathered outside government buildings demanding answers. Military bases were surrounded by angry citizens who had just learned that their own army had been committing genocide while they were told it was fighting a righteous war. But the most devastating blow came when Vorthan military units began refusing orders. Colonel Hexter of the 3rd Imperial Guard publicly announced that his unit would no longer follow commands from officers involved in the bioweapons program. Captain Mordis of the Naval Defense Force declared that she and her crew were placing Admiral Crixtel under citizens' arrest for war crimes. Entire battalions simply walked away from their posts, saying they would not serve an empire that murdered children for science experiments. Admiral Crixtel frantically tried to trace the source of the leaks while his world collapsed around him. He ordered his best computer experts to find whoever was responsible, but they came back with nothing. The data had appeared simultaneously on hundreds of different networks with no traceable source. It was as if the information had simply materialized out of thin air. His personal life began falling apart as quickly as his professional one. His wife refused to answer his calls after she learned about the experiments he had authorized. His daughter sent him a message calling him a monster and saying she never wanted to see him again. His own parents issued a public statement disowning him and expressing shame that they had raised such a person. Government officials who had been his political allies suddenly couldn't remember his name. Ministers who had praised his effective methods claimed they had never known the details of his operations. The Emperor himself issued a decree stating that Admiral Crixtal and his associates had been operating without imperial approval and would face the full consequences of their crimes. Within 72 hours of the first message appearing on his terminal, Admiral Crixtal found himself completely alone. His officers had deserted him, his government had abandoned him, his family had rejected him. Even his personal servants had quit and left his house empty. 3,000 light-years away on Earth, Admiral Kang Sora watched the Vorthan Empire tear itself apart on dozens of monitor screens in her underground command center. News feeds showed riots in major cities, military units in open rebellion, and government officials fleeing their posts to avoid angry mobs. "Nemesis status report," she said calmly. "Target Empire fragmenting ahead of schedule," came the artificial intelligence's synthesized voice. "Governmental collapse estimated in 18 hours. Admiral Crixtal's psychological profile indicates complete breakdown imminent. Justice parameters have exceeded optimal levels." Dr. Park Sun-ho, Earth's chief xenopsychologist, watched the screens with a mixture of amazement and professional fascination. He had studied alien psychology for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like this systematic psychological destruction of an entire government. "Admiral," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "you didn't just defeat them. You made them defeat themselves using their own guilt and shame." Admiral Kang nodded with satisfaction. "The most complete victory possible, Doctor. We didn't fire a single shot, didn't lose a single soldier, didn't even issue a formal declaration of war. We simply told the truth and let them destroy themselves with it." "The Vorthan Empire will never recover from this," Dr. Park observed. "Their own people will never trust their government again. Their military will never regain its cohesion. They've become their own worst enemy." "Good," Admiral Kang said coldly. "They murdered our healers. They killed refugees under our protection. They broke the most sacred laws of civilized warfare. Now they understand that humanity's justice is patient, precise, and absolutely merciless." On the screens, Admiral Crixtal appeared at a press conference, trying desperately to explain his actions to a hostile crowd of reporters and angry citizens. But his words only made things worse. Every excuse he offered revealed another crime. Every justification he attempted exposed another lie. The man who had thought humans were too weak to respond to mass murder was discovering that sometimes the strongest response is the one that makes your enemies destroy themselves with the weight of their own sins. 6 days. That's all it took for one of the galaxy's most powerful empires to completely collapse. The Vorthan Empire, which had controlled over 200 star systems and commanded fleets that could destroy entire worlds, simply ceased to exist. Not because of invasion or economic collapse or natural disaster, but because the truth had finally caught up with them. Admiral Krixtal knelt in heavy metal chains before a tribunal of his own people in what had once been the Imperial Palace, on Vorthan Prime. The Golden Throne Room, where emperors had ruled for 1,000 years, was now filled with angry citizens demanding justice. The man who had ordered the massacre of 847 human medical personnel now faced charges of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against his own species. The trial was being broadcast live across what remained of Vorthan space. Billions of people watched as their former military hero broke down completely, confessing to crimes that even his worst enemies had never imagined. He wept as he described the refugee camps that had been turned into testing sites. He sobbed as he admitted to ordering the murder of entire families to cover up his experiments. His officers fared no better. Captain Morgan, who had personally fired on the refugee lifeboats, collapsed during his testimony and had to be carried away on a stretcher. Intelligence Chief Vortek confessed to embezzlement, murder, and treason in a voice so quiet the judges had to ask him to repeat himself. One by one, the men who had thought themselves untouchable revealed the full scope of their crimes to a horrified galaxy. But it wasn't just the military leaders who fell. The entire government structure that had enabled their crimes crumbled as well. Ministers who had approved funding for the bioweapons program were arrested by their own security forces. Bureaucrats who had falsified reports about the refugee camps fled their offices before angry mobs could reach them. Even the emperor himself abdicated his throne and went into exile rather than face questions about what he had known and when he had known it. 3,000 light-years away, in the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council on Centauri Prime, representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in stunned silence. They had gathered expecting to witness humanity's response to the massacre. Instead, they had watched an entire empire destroy itself in less than a week. Ambassador Jung Minwoo stood at the center of the circular chamber, looking exactly as calm and composed as he had 6 days earlier when everyone had mocked humanity's weak response. His simple black suit was perfectly pressed, his expression was politely neutral, and his voice carried the same diplomatic tone that had fooled them all before. "Honored delegates," he began, "the Republic of Earth considers this matter resolved. Justice has been served through the defendant's own legal system, exactly as we requested in our initial statement." The chamber erupted in confused whispers. Council Speaker Thexmore of the Altarian Federation, who had praised humanity's mature restraint just days before, now looked like he had seen a ghost. "But how did you—" Thexmore stammered, unable to finish his question. Ambassador Jung smiled, and for the first time every alien in the room could see the predator that had been hiding behind the diplomat's mask. "We simply help the truth come to light. Honored Speaker, surely the Galactic Council supports transparency and the rule of law?" The delegates looked at each other with growing unease. They were beginning to understand that they had completely misjudged humanity's response. The humans hadn't been weak or passive. They had been patient, calculating, and absolutely ruthless in a way that none of them had expected. "The Republic of Earth has no further business regarding this matter," Jung Minwoo continued. "We trust that the surviving Vorthan colonies will establish new governments that respect the laws of civilized warfare. We wish them success in their rebuilding efforts." He turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind hundreds of alien representatives who were frantically recalculating everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. On Lunar Station, Dr. Kim Hana sat in her hospital bed, still, recovering from her injuries, but finally able to move around without assistance. She was reading news reports about the Vorthan trials when her personal tablet chimed with an incoming message. The message was simple and unsigned, but she knew exactly who had sent it. Dr. Kim, the crew of the Hippocrates has been avenged. 847 souls may rest in peace. Justice served without firing a single shot. Mission complete. Returning to standby mode. Admiral Kang. She closed the message and looked out through the station's large viewing window at him. Earth rising over Luna's horizon. The blue and green planet looked peaceful from here, but she now knew that beneath that calm surface lay something far more dangerous than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. Her colleague, Dr. Yoon Tae-hyung, entered her room carrying a stack of news tablets and wearing an expression that mixed amazement with dark humor. "Hana, you need to see this," he said, setting the tablets down on her bedside table. "The surviving Vorthan colonies are requesting humanitarian aid, medical supplies, food, emergency shelter for refugees from their own civil wars." "That's not surprising," she replied. "Their entire infrastructure collapsed when their government fell apart." "But here's the ironic part," Tae-hyung continued with a grim smile. "They're specifically requesting human medical assistance. They want our doctors and nurses to come help them rebuild their healthcare system." Dr. Kim Hana looked at the news reports and felt a complex mix of emotions. These were the same people whose military had murdered her friends and colleagues. The same species that had celebrated when Admiral Krikstal destroyed a medical ship full of healers. Now they were begging for help from the very people they had tried to destroy. "What did Earth's government say?" she asked. "Medical Command approved the mission," Tae-hyung replied. 3 hospital ships are already being prepared for deployment to Vorthan space. They want you to lead the mission once you're cleared for duty." She was quiet for a long moment, thinking about her friends who had died trying to save refugees. Dr. Choi Seul-gi, who had been holding a baby when the blast hit. Sergeant Yang Dae-ho, who had carried sick children to safety right up until the moment he was vaporized. 847 good people who had believed that healing others was the most important thing anyone could do. "Then we'll help them," she said finally. "We always do, it's what we are, but they'll remember what happens to those who target our healers." Across the galaxy, human medical ships continued their rescue operations just as they always had. The white hulls with their red cross markings moved through space like beacons of hope, responding to distress calls from any species that needed help. But now, when other civilizations saw those red crosses, they felt something they had never felt before, a mixture of gratitude and deep, respectful fear. The message was clear to every species watching. Humans would always come to heal your wounded and save your dying. But if you ever made the mistake of attacking their healers, you wouldn't face their armies or their fleets. You would face something far worse. You would face the truth about yourself, delivered with surgical precision and implacable patience until you destroyed your own empire with the weight of your crimes. In government buildings across the galaxy, military planners updated their threat assessments of humanity. The humans' military strength had always been impressive, but now they understood that the ships and weapons were just the visible part of something much larger. Humanity's real power lay in their ability to turn enemies against themselves, to make oppressors face the full consequences of their oppression, to ensure that justice was served even if it took time. Deep beneath Sol, in quantum computers that officially didn't exist, Nemesis returned to sleep. Its work was done, its mission complete. The artificial intelligence had achieved perfect justice without firing a single shot, without killing a single enemy, without even revealing its existence. It had simply told the truth, and let that truth do what truth always does when it finally comes to light. The galaxy was now a safer place for medical ships and refugee transports, not because anyone feared humanity's weapons, but because they understood that humans never forgot when their healers were murdered. And when humans remembered, they didn't just seek revenge. They sought perfect, patient, and absolutely inevitable justice.